Afternoon, folks. This one's for the Qigong fraternity. It's been a fairly full-on year. This is our third month now in lockdown in Vic. We're nearly halfway through October 2021. And I've given some lectures on belief and etc. That you may or may not looked at. This one's really, I'm going back to working with Jun Chi, Z-H-E-N, separate word, Q-I. Jun means truth or true. So literally it's true Qi, and that works in an acupuncture sense, but in a Qigong sense, Professor Master Dulo Yi used the term Jun Chi in Qigong sense as the great energy of the universe. Her master Jianzun Kun is also female. This was passed on from Jianzun Kun to Dulo Yi. She was Vice President, World Association Medical Qigong, I think retired now. And I haven't seen her in 20 years or something. And my chances of going back to China and catching up with my teachers and friends there is probably fairly slim given the COVID travel environment and also the China sort of political environment, I guess you could say. So I guess my time in China at this point is probably done. We'll see. Anyway. What Professor Dulo Yi did was pass on Jun Chi to a handful of people when she was in Australia, but I think very few people had a Qigong background as I did, and very few people cultivated it and worked with it. I think most people that received it was probably in the couple of sessions she gave in terms of healing, a group healing. And those that are open to this idea understand distance healing. If you work with Reiki, you understand distance healing. If you work with spiritual healing, you understand distance healing. If you work with kinesiology, you understand surrogate, and at the higher levels, you can understand that in terms of distance healing as well. So in Qigong, even in, not even in Jun Chi, just in Jun Chi, but also in things like Zhen Qi Qigong, we talk about the Qi field, linking into lineage energy, linking into the Qi fields that are already present around the globe, whether they're in nature, on the top of sacred mountains and special places, beautiful places, waterfalls, etc., but certainly where those special places also have had cultivation for centuries with high-level Qigong people. So this is how it works. You have this beautiful place in nature that the ancients who were sensitive could feel, not only by its beauty, but anything beautiful in nature that's fairly clean. In the olden days, there would have been no pollution, had very good energy. So they would feel the energy, they would build monasteries or temples or whatever there. Then they would cultivate and do their practice there. So they're drawing in nature's energy, drawing it from the universe, drawing it from the natural world around them, cultivating their energy and doing so, linking back to nature, and that energy starts to reinforce within that environment. So nature provides it. Mankind with the special Qi that the brain has, a special kind of Qi, links into nature, cultivates it within the system, so the outer and the inner become one Qi field. The human system is such that it can cultivate that energy, expand upon it, purify it, and put it back into environment. This is very evident in things like blessings, for example, where you can come to a place where the energy's been negative for a long, long, long time. And I used to go to places doing blessings a lot. And I'd go to an area where there was very ancient, the ling of nature, which is a Chinese way of saying you may have some amorphous energy consciousness there that doesn't have a brain, but it can be living in that environment for centuries. It can be very large and can affect that environment in a very negative way. But also you can have places that have had a very negative things happen there, whether it could be negative naturally or it could be negative from human interaction. And it doesn't change over time. And in fact, the negativity is so strong that people who go into it most times are affected by the negativity, which is amplified by the people back into the environment, which reinforces the negativity for the next lot of people that come in, and so it goes on. So what blessings do, and having high-level Qigong understanding, means that firstly, you're not being overcome by environment. You're linking into that which is pure in environment and original, cultivating that and pouring that back into the environment. So you're purifying environment. So in that sense, that's where blessings happen too, is that you actually come to a place that doesn't correct itself, left to its own devices, stays negative, and will stay like that forever just about. Nature doesn't correct it. And the human being has the ability to link into all of that with the special energy of the human brain, or the mind, if you like, rather, not just the brain housing mind, being able to cultivate that energy and purify something in the environment that may have never had the opportunity to be purified. So Qigong science very much talks about that in terms of negative psychic energy, negative emotional energy, earthbound spirits and all those sorts of things, which goes into the whole spiritual world and goes into that whole world of blessings and clearings. But also, it's not really any different to clearing and blessing or lifting the chi in an environment doing cultivation. So what I'm going to do now is just do a very simple Jun Chi. I've already connected to Jun Chi. So for me, connecting to Jun Chi, there's a special point above the head. Now, what the ancient Taoists used to do, and the emperors were connected to the ancient Taoist priests because they would put the almanacs together, deliver it to the emperor. The emperor would release those almanacs of farming and the timing of particular things to all of the masses. And call upon the Taoists in terms of the armies. A very simple example would be they had the Taoists view the chi over the head of the army and whether it was fortuitous for them to go to siege or to war or whatever they might have had to do to defend the realm in a sense too. So the chi above a person's head, it tells someone who's sensitive and can see that or feel that, the condition of a person, or whether they have some sort of negative event about to happen to them. Because if the energy above the head is gone, then that person, for want of better language, is a living dead. In other words, there's something's going to occur for them in the not too distant future that's not so positive. The ultimate not so positive. In other words, they're not going to be here. So Edgar Cayce talked about that, actually getting into a lift, and he was about to get into a lift, I think one of the stories was, and he noticed that the energy wasn't there above these people's heads. He didn't get into the lift crashed, people died. This is something that I've used over the years getting on a plane, not that it makes much difference when you're getting on a plane and it's going to be negative above the pilot's head or above the overall chi above the plane. Probably wouldn't have been so good me trying to convince everyone else in my entourage, my family, not getting on that plane, we're getting off. But if they trusted me enough, they'd probably do it. And hopefully the plane didn't crash anyway, right? So one of the things is evaluating this chi above the head. And in cultivation, the building of a special energy pole above the head is called gong. And it happens from virtue or from giving. So people that just cultivate Qigong don't necessarily get Gong at all. Gong is this energy that's developed by love, compassion, not just loving in others, but selfless service, and also the cultivation of Qi and linking hand in hand with, if you want to call it, the spirits of Qigong, or the ancestry of Qigong, or the divinity, linking back to source. So the Chinese would say linking back to the Tao. We might say linking back to, the Heavenly Father or something like that in the Western sort of vernacular or language. So Jun Chi in that sense is, for me, firstly connecting to lineage, connecting to the teachers that imparted that to me, which was from Jianzhen Kung down into Dulo Yi, and then I received it. And what I did with it was, because I'd already been working in Qigong a lot, was then to sit with it and go, what is the effect? What is this in my body? And how can I now tap into that? And when I first tapped into it, it was a quiet whisper. And I went, oh, okay, this seems nice, very clean, very pure, but it didn't seem to have much get up and boom to it, right? But it was absolutely pure. So what I did over time was link to it more and learn that this is called a motionless Qigong. That it's not one of the physical Qigong systems where we're not doing movement like Tai Chi or Guigen or any of these systems, Zhenang. We're not actually doing form, pushing, pulling Qi and pushing Qi, or opening and closing, or doing form very similar to Tai Chi. There's none of that. It's a motionless Qigong. And for example, in the Zhenang Qigong, you have aspects of meditation in there as well, where you might have a standing meditation in 3 centers merging, for example, where you really do some prior movement, linking into the universal chi field, linking the body to that, and then you really are standing there for an hour and a half, letting this energy work, right? And also in things like Guigen, you've got 5-element Qigong, and you've got 1 global regulation exercise, and they're done. But if you've got a very limited time, in the West, the focus is on those movements. But in China, the focus is on the hour and a half seated meditation, returning to nothingness, in a sense, nothingness being the best medicine. So at the higher levels of Qigong, it becomes mind awareness and consciousness, and becomes this motionless Qigong. So you could say meditation, but it's not the meditation that we understand in the West. Very much we understand meditation as something active. We're visualizing this, we're listening to music, we're going for walks in nature, we're listening to waterfalls, we're visualizing this, that, and the other. The Qigong meditations are not like that at all. They're all about being as empty as possible, not forcing anything, but just listening to breathing, being still, and allowing, if you like, all of the movement, all of this water that's going everywhere to settle back into one pond, if you like, and for that pond eventually to become still, just by observation and not by any force of will. So you can do that anyway, just by sitting around and being still and breathing, listening to it, and not concentrating on anything other than just being relaxed and doing low and slow breathing. Jun Chi, where you link into this other thing, is that you're linking into, by connecting to it, you're flicking a switch, and that switch links to this energy, links to your teachers, to the ancestry of that, and creates an instantaneous chi field. Then by staying with that, without any force of will, that chi field strengthens and strengthens and strengthens over time. And over time meaning the duration of that particular meditation. So you might be doing it for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and if 20 minutes is stronger than 15, half an hour is stronger than 20, 3/4 of an hour is stronger than half an hour, and an hour is stronger. And for the ideal, in the ideal world, according to Master Luo Yi, what you really want to do is have a minimum of 1 hour. Now, none of us really get a lot of that luxury. I get up early in the morning and I can get that meditative time in if I want to. But over time, you also learn about having this, being in a state of Qigong all the time, well, as much of the time as possible. Obviously, when you're filling the car with fuel, or you're in a heated debate with somebody, or you're sorting out something that requires a lot of mental energy and thinking, and you're flicking through papers or signing this or doing that, there's sort of everyday tasks that demand, pull you away from your center, in a sense, that, demand you to be giving attention to them, things that, do with your job or things like that. You're not really in that Qigong state, but you can be if you develop the awareness to prior to those things and get yourself in that state, that even in any of those activities, you're bringing in that Qi field, for want of better language, right? That presence. So Jun Chi is something that, firstly, I connect, there's a point above the head. And some people call this the Buddha point or the Christ point. And what I'm doing really is reaching up with my mind above my head, and it's generally to the extent of your hands. It's a point up there where I reach up, and what I do when my mind goes up, I reach that point with just extending my awareness up. What occurs is I reach this point of purity. There's a stillness when I reach that point. Now, other ways to do that are to bring the hands above the head, connect to that point, then bring the hands down to the third eye into the heart, and stay there in that sense of connecting. I can do it quickly by connecting to Jun Chi by going up to that point. So you have to receive Jun Chi first to be able to do this, but still connecting to that point, or the Buddha point, the Christ point, whatever you like to call it. There's this pure point of energy that you connect to. And what happens with that then, it immediately flows down like a beam of light, like through the gung almost, this beam above the head, straight into the upper dantian, or around the third eye. So it's not just here, tianmu, in between the eyes, but it's also inside. So it's a space between here and here, right? But more closely to the front. So that whole energy, firstly, it sinks there, and then you let your awareness sink down, and it appears in the heart area, the heart chakra, for want of better language, I guess, that whole middle dantian. And then the last place it appears, because it's sinking, and it's also being translated from higher frequency, and we know with the chakras that the higher frequencies are above the head, above the crown. They work their way down to the lowest frequency, which is at the base chakra. So in this sense, what's happening with Jun Chi is it's coming down from the head, working its way down to here firstly, which doesn't take a lot of time, then it works its way into the heart. And you do this with your attention to keep an eye on it. And then it works its way into the lower dantian, below the navel, around this area inside. Once it's connected there, that's the beginning of the process, really, because then the energy starts to cycle and build in you and around you. From that point, it immediately affects environment. For me, once I do those connections with it, because I'm so used to doing it, within the shortest time, seconds really, I can look out to not as far as I can see initially, but certainly within, say, 100, 200 meters, up to half a kilometer, everything is affected by that energy within that periphery immediately into the earth and above. And that is something that I find fascinating about, and this is probably something we can chat about another time, the fascination of being an energy scientist. In other words, to develop the ability to feel and sense these things, and then observe why, as a scientist, in a sense, you're looking at these things occurring and then trying to understand what is actually occurring and where does it come from. We don't really always have the answers to those things, and presuming what it is and making up what it is doesn't help. The best explanation we get is that we're linking into this energy, great energy of the universe, from our teachers, and they say it's the pure form of Qi. And also, our teachers are very strict in talking about things that aren't Qigong. There are certain healing modalities around that use energy that are discounted and dismissed out of hand by higher Qigong teachers, because they say, it is not Qigong, it doesn't contain higher information. That's a very interesting statement, right? Let that sink in. It's not Qigong. It doesn't contain higher energy information. So it's a lower vibratory thing. It's still energy, it still has an effect, it still has a force, but there are certain modalities and certain energies that people are working with that don't contain higher energy information. So they're not pure, they're not the pure energy of the universe, they're not this great energy of the universe. And really, ultimately, that's what we want. And I remember saying to my students years ago, if you had a choice between strong energy and pure energy, what would you take? And of course, I'm leading them there. The answer is pure. And initially, working with pure energy means you're working with something that's not so strong because we're not used to it. Our systems aren't generally pure. They've become polluted by lifestyles and attitudes, right? And so we're finding our way back home in that sense by doing these cultivational tools and exercises. So building strong energy is not so hard. And martial arts does that, but it's not necessarily pure energy. And some of the healing modalities that we were talking about before that are discounted as not containing higher energy information, some of them have strong energy, more of a psychic sort of energy, which can have a heat to it and sort of a weight to it that sort of impacts around the third eye and the heart. But it's not pure at all, and can actually have a deleterious effect on people that are very sensitive. So we want to have pure energy, and then by linking to that pure energy without desire, over time, that pure energy starts to build in us because it's purifying us. It's like we're walking into that fresh air and starting to smell it for the first time. Naturally, the rest of our body's filled with old, stale air. The more you're around pure mountain fresh air, for example, and breathing it in and out, eventually you oxygenate and purify your blood and your system with all of that wonderful, clean air, right? It makes the same sort of sense here. That once we first get that whiff of or contact with pure energy, it's very, very weak and our system's still toxic. And so there's two things going on. One is we're gradually by connecting to it, allowing it to strengthen in our system. And it's strengthening at the pace we can handle how toxic we've been. So we have reactions to it. If we have a lot of it straight up, if we're in the presence of someone whose energy is quite strong and we do one of these Qigong systems, there are effects that happen with people. You know, a Herxheimer effect, where you have people go into a cold or a reaction, a detox, headaches, nausea. I've had people leave the room and go outside and feel sick. And these are normal, but not expected reactions, right? They're normal. They're not unusual in the science of Qigong at all. So the idea really is not to have too much of it. You know, if we're going for a really toxic diet, for example, to a really clean diet, you probably want to work your way slowly off the toxic diet as you introduce more cleaner things into it, rather than go cold turkey into it. You may crash and be quite ill as the body's adjusting to it. So this is the same, is that you want to take in this pure energy in little bits, but what it's doing is adjusting your system. You could say pure energy is a very high vibration to the point where my hand wouldn't be shaking. It's so fine, as if my hand is still, right? But as a visual, you could say that it's a very fast vibration, right? Very high frequency, just as a description. And ill energy, a normal human energy, is a very low vibration, quite a sickly, slow, thick, horrid vibration in a way. It's quite toxic and quite thick and palpable and quite dirty in a way, if we can use that language, right? Excuse me for saying that. So when we introduce ourselves or come in the presence of or receive something that's very pure, naturally it challenges all of that. It's pushing against that to raise all of that low vibration to a higher vibration. In doing so, you're awakening the intelligence of the system. And that means you're awakening from a Qi point of view, which is your subatomic energy, shaking all of the cells, all of the organs and everything in the body to vibrate at a higher frequency. And in so doing, they become more efficient, more awake. And naturally, if the system's more efficient and more awake, it starts shedding dirt and gunk and poisons out of it, right? So that's very normal. So you want to look after yourself if you're going through this sort of cultivation. You want to have cleaner diet slowly if your diet's pretty off, but more cleaner, fresh, energized, filtered water, whatever. You can work your way to the cleanest water you can get, you know, in modern society, and energize. And more of that and less, and balance how much coffee or tea or stimulants and other things you have, right? So you want to have the bulk of it being water and less of the others. And eventually, if you really want to become more monk-like, it'll be water. There wouldn't be any other stimulants involved, right? So Jun Chi is that. So I connect to it firstly, and when I'm connecting to my teachers mentally as respect. I like that, really. It's a little bit of ritual, but it shows this sense of respect. It doesn't show a sense, it shows a sense of humility. And humility means sensitivity deeply, because it means willingness to learn. And to learn, we have to be incredibly sensitive. Sensitive because we're listening with our whole being. And we can't listen with our whole being if we're not sensitive, we're not awake, we're not receptive. So sensitivity and receptivity very, very well go together. So you could say humility, sensitivity, receptivity, they're all variations of the same word in a way, right? Even though they're not the same word, but they mean that they're all part of the same diamond. They're all part of the same jewel in that way. So what we're really wanting to do then is introduce this energy slowly. So in Jun Chi, I'm connecting to lineage out of respect. I'm linking above the head. I'm drawing that down to third eye and to heart into Dantian, allowing that to build in my body and find its place and right me, correct me, which happens all the time when I do this. And then that builds in the environment. Building into the environment means that then anyone within that environment is receiving it without directing it by my will. But also it can be sent over distance to anybody, anywhere. Right? So obviously I'm not going to put this out in the public forum because people go, what are you talking about? You're nuts. And that's fine. But it'll go within the Qigong fraternity and those that are open to energy sciences to look at this and go, thank you very much. So while I'm chatting to you, I'm in a state of Jun Chi and you're receiving it. And so in some sense, I could have this as a motionless, no talking video, but you might fall asleep or get very bored, or you might get bored listening to me talk. But what I'm doing now is I'm in a state of Jun Chi, and I'm also describing what it's about. So in that sense, by listening to the lecture, you're receiving the energy. Now, this is not an uncommon thing that's occurred. Jun Xin was a famous Qigong master, the most famous master in terms of being tested by scientists to see if Qi was real. And he did phenomenal things. And he wrote a book, a very interesting book. And at some point, I think I have made it available to some students. But we can talk about that another time. He was tested in physics laboratories in China and in the US. And what they found was quite extraordinary, what he could do. He could do things where he could change the radioactive half-life of material, which was seen as impossible to do. You can't change radioactive material. He could separate chemicals that were combined into a jar back into their original liquids and separate them within the jar. He could do all sorts of fantastic things like that. He could change cancer cells in a petri dish within a meter, and then he did the experiment at a kilometer. He did the experiment eventually 1,000 kilometers away or more, and he could still have the same effect. So science came to the conclusion by working with him that firstly, Qi was real, that it was a form of energy. They also realized it was a form of matter, had substance, and it contained information. Going back to what I said before about higher energy information in real Qigong and in Qigong. So Jun Xin was the most tested, and he talked about all of these things about influencing and creating a Qi field. I'm just going to pause for 1 minute. Sorry, had to go for a minute. The dog was scratching at the door. Had to let it back in. So we'll talk more about Jun Xin another time. I'm not sure why I was alluding to informing you about that. Now I lost the plot on that. So yes, okay, I've got it. Talking to you instead of just having a meditation where I'm producing Jun Chi, which is what I did when we took students to Thailand years ago. We'd have 20 odd students sitting there, 42 students, I think it was actually, when we did Thailand and Nepal back in 2001. And so we had a meditation when we were up in Chiang Mai, or north of Chiang Mai, up in, what was it called now? Oh, geez, it eludes me. We were up near the elephant camps north of Chiang Mai in Thailand. Anyway, and we had a hall there, and I did an hour-long Jun Chi meditation. What do you think happens in an hour-long Jun Chi meditation? People are dropping off to sleep, they're getting tired legs sitting, their backsides are hurting. So I realized in that even though my intentions were good and they would receive benefit from it, it probably wasn't the best way to try and get it across to them. So since then I have done long ones, but I've done generally short ones. So what Jun Xin did was he would do these hour lectures, 2-hour lectures, and 6-hour lectures, and be doing Fa Qi the whole time. In other words, energy or Qi would be emitted through the whole lecture. Now, he didn't have to be thinking while he's talking about Qigong and healing and science and all these things. He wasn't thinking, I've got to keep sending Qi. It wasn't an act of will. It was an act of connecting to the source that he had done so many times, or to his lineage, and connecting to Jun Chi, and then establishing that as a given in the environment, that would now be flowing in the environment while he was talking. Science came and measured some of his lectures where they put up special equipment around. They found ultrasonic waves, infrasonic sound waves, which are below hearing in the environment. They picked up some other frequencies within the environment. They couldn't work out how this was happening, but it happened through the whole of the lectures, whether it was an hour, 2 hours, or 6 hours. So you can look up Jun Xin, Y-A-N, X-I-N, last name being Yan, and Xin Yan, really, Jun Xin. He was in China. I think he exiled and eventually lived in New York. Very hard to find information on him now. But I have a copy of one of the books that he wrote, and it's in English, and it was interpreted in English, that he oversaw. Very, very, wow. It's a one-of-a-kind book. It blows your mind. If you didn't know his background and that he had this, he was revered as a treasure in China, and if you didn't know that he had been scrutinized and put himself to be scrutinized in the hands of physicists and scientists to prove that Qi and Qigong was real, then reading this book, you'd think it was just made up by some madman, because the claims in it are so fantastic, and the things that can occur, and some of the teachers that he knew, and some of the things they could do. Now, for the Western person, this just seems like all bluff and sleight of hand and magic. But for people who understand China and some of the things that have occurred, and some of the things I've seen, and some of the things other people have seen, they'll understand that very mysterious things can occur when you understand Qigong science, right? So I'm going to leave that with you for the moment. I'm not going to try and convince you of it. But he would give these long lectures, and while giving the lectures, they'd be sending Qi to the audience. And of course, everyone would receive that in a different way. Some people wouldn't feel it at all, but everyone would receive it. They may have reactions afterwards, depending on how fine their energy was, or how thick their energy was, how low their frequencies were. Because a lot of people who attended were quite ill. They wanted to go there and be healed by him. And there would be spontaneous reactions in the audience. There would be people who, immediately being sick or vomiting up things, or have cancer in the throat and they'd vomit it up, things like that. All sorts of strange things occurring. Others would not necessarily think they felt anything, but everyone got something from it. And not only that, it was about awakening intelligence too, like opening third eye, opening the ability to see visions, opening this ability to be connected to this energy and have sensitivity. So it's not all about at the coarse level of having organs work better. It's also that you're wanting to raise the vibration through each of these lectures for anyone that can attend. And he had courses in Qigong as well. And the aim is to raise that vibration so you're connecting to this energy, you're inhabiting with this energy, you're breathing it, you're smelling it, you're around it all the time. And naturally what you're doing is you're humbling yourself to it, because it's the pure energy of the universe, right? So you're humbling yourself to this source energy, this pure Qi. And naturally, when you're in its environment, in its fold, it's constantly shaking you to lift your vibration to it, to match it. Very much like a homeopathic in that sense, right? But much higher frequency. So it's shaking you all the time to shed dross. So every time you receive Jun Chi, and every time I do it, I'm shedding out of all of my pores, at your orifices, your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your ears, and down below. Your body is shedding out your navel. It's shedding out your Mingmen at the back, out the crown. So top, bottom, all your orifices, etc., right? And all the psychic centers. So out your palms, eyes, nose, mouth, ears, etc. Third eye, chakras, all these things. So you're venting, because there's a Qi pressure in a sense. This finer energy is pressing against you, holding you. It's like dipping you in it. And in doing so, it's shaking your system, for want of a better description, but this so that you can understand this. And therefore your system's shedding. It's shedding this dross, this negativity. Now, the finer you get, the more you do that shedding or shaking may only last a short period of time, might last 5, 10, 15 minutes. And then your system becomes calm. Then you have to process that. It's not as if that's the end of your journey. It's like that's as much as your system can handle at that time, if you like, of that shaking. And there's no harm to stay there an hour, but you only shake so much. Then you'll process from that. And the process of that might be that you're just tired, or you're hungry, or you're thirsty, or you actually do get like a chill or a fever or something like that, and need to be bedridden for a bit to shake it off. Go through some sort of healing crisis, for want of better language. I don't like the term crisis, really. Some sort of healing reaction, you could say. Response is even better. It's a response to the energy. It's not a reaction. You're not reacting to it, which means you're against it in a way. That's what reacting means. You're responding to the energy. It's shaking your system to respond. So that's enough of that. I'm going to leave it right there, because I don't want this to be too long. It's already 20 minutes. How does this happen? Sit with it, play it again, feel the energy. My pleasure. You're welcome. Cheers. Talk to you.